Welcome to chapter 19. Experience has shown that the grammar in this chapter is quite manageable, but the text is difficult because this is the first text in the textbook that has not really been simplified for a non-native audience. This is a Mari text as it might be written for Mari native speakers. And the syntax can be a bit daunting. But as you can see, if you watch the recording of my students reading this text, eventually they figure it out and eventually they get a hang of it, of all the things that are happening. So do not despair if you are at first struggling with this text. Everyone is struggling with this text the first time they encounter it, but they get it eventually. And once they've learned it, they are prepared for all the syntactic things that we're happening. There's not really even anything new in the syntax here. It's just the accumulation of all the things that we have previously discussed that happens here. Okay. We start by looking at the nominalization, which happens with the suffix mash in Mari. You might be thinking, didn't we talk about how the passive participle serves as a verbal noun? Yeah, but the verbal noun is what we use if we want to put a verb into a position that is usually reserved for a noun, but we want to keep it as a verb that does verby things. A nominalization is if you really want to make a noun out of something, the act of reading, the act of studying, the act of loving or whatnot. Yeah, and it has the ending mush that you attach directly to the verbal stem. Not even going to comment what happens here, you know it already. But a little note that I want to make here. What happens when we attach the inessive endings and the illative endings to it? Here we sometimes have an haplology that if we have the regular form would be singemashishte, but this shish is often just put together that we have in singemashte, that we have singemash and then just te attached to it. It is like simplified in pronunciation. And here we have some numerical data on it. Watch long form recording if you want to see more information on this. So this mash, it corresponds roughly to Finnish minen, and it is completely productive. So you can form this from every noun. This next suffix, the deverbal nominal suffix sh, this is not nearly as productive. This is attached to a verbal stem to denote something that is produced through the verb or a thing connected to the thing. So if we have yodash to ask, verb stem yod, we have then yodish, a question. We have modash to play, verb stem mod, we have modish, a game or a toy. Kochkash to eat, kochkish, food. Peledash, verb stem pelet, to bloom, peledish, a flower. Jongelo, to make a mistake, to make an error, jongelish, mistake, error. So it's not productive, but it is important because a lot of very widely used nouns are formed using it. The nominal verbal suffix ang, this is used to form adjectives that mean taking up a quality of some sort. Vi force, vi yangash, to take force to become stronger. You can compare this to, we've had an adjective suffix that forms adjectives that are similar in meaning, that are just having the thing. And this is now a verb meaning getting this thing. And it's fully productive. So if we have like microbi, a microbe, we could have microbianash, to become microbe infested, to get yourself some microbes. Again, productive like the am thing, we could have microbian, microbe infested, literally like microbi or so. Yeah. Less productively, but sometimes you also attach it to adjectives to say to become that what the adjective is, like kumda rod, kumdangash is to become broader. But this is not productive in this. There's a different suffix that we're going to look at in later chapters that is more conventionally used in such contexts. Deverbal verbal suffix d, t, this is basically a transitivizing suffix. And t or d as a transitivizing suffix, you might know this from different languages, like you might know this from Finnish, where we have it used fairly widely. Basically, it's not generally productive, but for all the verbs that we just looked at, we can take this the and attach it to the thing that we just had, and then we get a second conjugation verb, which means to add this quality to instill this quality. So from viyangash, to become stronger, we get viyangdash, to strengthen something, to make something stronger. From mikrobiangash to become microbe infested, we have mikrobiangdash to infest something with microbes. Like just basically doing something rather than like to make something get something, like just a transitivization of what we were just looking at with the previous suffix. So kumdangdash, to widen, to broaden, to make something broader. Outside of this context here, where it is productive, it is not productive, but it can be used fairly. It is used in some very commonly used verbal situations. Like we have purash or tempuro, to enter, go in, purtash, to bring in, to bring something in, to enter transitively. We have volash versus volo, to descend, volto, to lower, to make something go down. Yeah. Compound past tense 2. I had promised that there are 4 of these. Good news is that this one is neither in formation nor in meaning very difficult. The formation is present tense, just like as in compound past tense 1, with ulmash, which is the form of was in the simple past tense 2. So formation, once you know that, completely trivial. Positive, negative, just put the ulmash on what you had. Conjugation class doesn't matter. Also with to be, looks quite the same. The difference between, and its usage, it's basically the same as compound past tense 1, but it is used in reference to things that you did not directly observe yourself. So if you say that when I was little, I used to go to the village, you would use, I used to go to the forest, or I used to love to go to the forest. You would here use compound past tense 1. But if you're talking about your grandfather, what he did when he was a kid, when you were not there to observe this, you use this one now, compound past tense 2. This is a so-called evidential distinction. You're grammatically marking the source of the information if you saw something yourself, if you observed something to yourself, or if you are relying on secondhand information. As a consequence of this, it is not that common to have first-person forms in the compound past tense 2. How often does it happen that you used to do something habitually, but you were not a witness to it? Well, it does happen. And the sentences that we have in something called mirative extension. This happens often with evidential forms, that forms that are originally used to mark that something is derived from indirect evidence are then also used to express mirativity, which is that something is surprising. It defies expectations. It turns out that blah, blah, blah. So this one is like, and I could live without you, using this this past tense form. So it turns out that I can live without you. We didn't see that coming, did we? Mogaimui ulam ulmash. Oh, look what I have become, Kwesi, or what I am. It's like you're surprised with your own development here. Okay, so much to this. We are meeting a new participle in this chapter. The future necessitive participle in shash, used in reference to things that will be done in the future. And yeah, formation, it's just shash attached to the verbal stem with all the usual things happening. The usage is a bit non-trivial, because this participle is not the whole dimension. The active passive dimension here is basically lost. If we have like ishtishash pasha, from ishtash to do, pasha work that is to be done. Here, this is passive reading. The work should be done. But if we say shushash kechelashte is in the days, and shushash is from shuash, verb from shu, to arrive. So it's like in the coming days, in the days that are going to arrive. And this is, of course, then an active reading. So it's like the days they are going to do the arriving, whereas the work is not going to be doing the doing. The work is going to be subject. It's going to be the object of the doing. So this whole dimension, passive active, doesn't matter in this participle. You just form the shash participle, and the context will suggest if active or passive reading makes more sense. So we could have like a kaishash korno, a road that is to be gone, or we can have a marlan kaishash üder. Marlan kayash, like going to the man, is getting married. So it's a girl that is going to get married. So the critical thing is it refers to things that will happen or that should happen in the future in some shape or form. But active passive, well, you can figure it out from context. And as you can see from these examples, it's usually only one reading makes any sense. So yeah. And like the passive participle, this participle can also be used as a verbal noun, for example, in combination with postpositions. Like questions, this is a question about going to work. So like questions about the going to work or so. So if you want to do the same thing, which we have already been looking at the usage of the past participle as a verbal noun, putting it in an anomalous knot, but you want to specifically refer to something that is going to happen in the future. You can also do this with the future necessitive participle. It's considerably less common than with the passive participle, but it still happens. It can also be used as a verbal noun. Yeah, and we have some constructions which we will learn, we will look at systematically at a later point, like mi kai shash ulam. I am to go. This is like I must go. I have the obligation to go. This is like a construction, we could call it. Like it's systematically how you form a necessitative construction that we're going to look at future time, because of course we've met malam kayash kulesh. To me it is necessary to go, I must go. We're going to look at the differences between these different later. Usage of dative suffixes, the dative suffix lan on infinitive endings. This is something that happens in literary meta-Mari. It doesn't happen in all varieties of Mari. Like you won't find this in Hill Mari, for example, but basically the further to the east you go, the more likely you are to encounter this. And that is, you can take the lan and not stick it to an infinitive if you want to specifically stress the final nature of the infinitive. Final in the sense that the infinitive notes the purpose for something, the reason for something. So one must study for 4 to 5 years in order to get a diploma. So in English, you could add this in order. You can make, like in these situations where I say to get a diploma, you could do that in English. One must study 4 to 5 years to get a diploma. But if you really want to stress that it's the purpose of it, you can add this in order before the to. And that's similar to what this lam is doing in these things in Mari. I have to buy tickets in order to go to Moscow. One must study a lot in order to learn a language well. Yeah. But it's not obligatory in these cases. You can also just use the infinitive. Words and word usage. Some notes on words formed with rak, the comparative suffix. I mentioned when we introduced it that it is not always just used to indicate that something is more XYZ, like older than, like with an age, those with an age older than 18. It can also be used sort of to say a bit of something, like easy rak kapan. So kapan is having a stature, easy is small, having a smallish stature, like a bit small or so. Those of you that know German, German does this occasionally, like with älter. If you say like eine ältere Dame, an older woman, you're not really, well, it doesn't work in English, kind of, sort of, I guess. You're not really saying that the woman is older than somebody else or that she's super old. You're just saying she's a bit old. So this is like this sort of like this a bit of something. This is a frequent something frequently expressed with by this rak, by comparative forms with rak. And sometimes it's really hard to put your finger on what exactly it does. Like if we have kuze, how, and we have kuze rak, how, what's it doing here? I don't know. Okay, onchich and gitch, we have met these postpositions in a spatial sense long ago. Now we're also meeting them in like onchich from in front of, gitch from. Now we're also meeting them in temporal sense. Onchich can also mean ago, and gitch can mean in after. But we've already seen this in a previous chapter, in chapter 8, when Anush was sick and the doctor said he's coming after 3 days. Kum keche gitch. Kum keche onchich is 3 days ago, and kum keche gitch is in 3 days, after 3 days. Yeah, in 3 days if you're using the present tense, the present point as a reference frame, or after 3 days if it is from some other point as a reference frame. Koltash, to send. Originally, this verb actually meant to let go, like letting, if you have a boat and you're letting it go in the river and you're letting it float down the river, or raft, most likely, this is what you would use. But here you see some nowadays prototypical usages of it. I sent a letter. Who sent you? But it is also quite often used in spectral auxiliary constructions, which is to say it loses its core semantics and just expresses a spectral value or an Aktionsart, if you speak German or linguistic terminology. So it communicates how the internal structuring of an event works. And we can basically distinguish two different facets here. One of them is showing the completion of an action. And you can if you think about the act of sending a letter or letting a raft down a river, you can imagine, like, both of these aspects we're going to look at. Both of these you can read the act of sending into it. Like, you can see how this could, like, just picture the process. So if you send a letter, you have the letter, you're standing at the post box, you put the letter in, gone is the letter, and that's it. The action is complete, no more letter. The thing you had in your hand is gone forevermore. That's like if you have drinking send, it's drinking up. You drink the drink that you had in front of you until it's gone and no more drink. Swallowing down, same thing. You had something in your mouth, you swallow it until it's gone, there's nothing left of it. The other aspect of it is, the other dimension of it, don't want to use aspect in too many meanings here. The other layer that you have is sometimes you have so-called inquisitive meanings where you express that you were starting something. And here it's better, like, imagine the whole act of sending a letter from the letter's perspective. It is thrown in the post box, and that's the start of its journey. That's where the whole thing gets going. Or it's easier maybe to conceptualize with a raft. If you're sitting on the raft and somebody is letting go of the raft, for you that's sitting on the raft, this is not the act of doing an action and then the whole thing is getting over with. It's the action of, like, something happens and then that gets the whole process started. It's like the firing shot. And if we have something like Kurschen Koltash, running send, that means to take off running, you're starting the action. Or if you say crying send, Shorten Koltash, it's to break out in tears, to start crying. It's the beginning of it's marking the phase of beginning this action. Okay, Toresh, postposition meaning against, has a bunch of usages that are good to know. That it can be, like, used in combination with an infinitive if you're against doing something. It can be against, like, on the opposite side of something. It can be against if you have it, like, in combination with a noun, with a noun of something that you are opposed to. Oh, sorry, the whole thing of the being opposite, that's not even mentioned here. That's that's a meaning that is not in this overview here. If you are opposed, this is all just being opposed to something. Yeah, you can see that if you have nominal elements that you are opposed to in some in some way, then you usually have a dative marking. I am opposed to this. Tide, this, tidlan, to this. Tide, planlan, to this plan, they are not opposed. Yeah, but with a verb, you generally just have the infinitive. Speaking of infinitives, if we use the infinitive in combination with liash, to be, to become, we already looked at one function that this had when we had the whole, if something is permissible or not. Shubshash lieshmo, may one smoke, can one smoke? Shubshash okli, no smoking, smoking is not allowed. But it can also, and in this function, it's always in the third person. It can also be used though, and now it is inflected for person, to mark that you decide yourself to do something, you commit yourself to doing something, you promise to do something. Like we, we decide to employ the whole thing, and then lina, we became, inflected for person, first person plural here. And this is just meaning that the usage here is that we committed ourselves to that, or tudo tolash lie. And this is also, we can see that's not impersonal because we have an overt subject here. Shihide, to come, was, became, happened. Well, it means promised, decided, committed. They committed themselves to come. Okay, putting and placing. This is straightforward and yet tricky, that we have a whole set of verbs in Mar used for putting and placing that are used depending on what position you are putting or placing something. If you are putting something in a standing position, like a water bottle or a ladder against a wall or a tree or so, the verb for putting it or placing it is shogaltash. And once you do it, then it is standing there. If you are putting something like a book on the table, and afterwards it lies on the table, for this putting, we use the word pistash, and that is then just putting something in a lying position. There's also the form optash, which has the dimension of putting it repeatedly. So if you say "My knigam ist den bak optem," it's more like I'm putting the books on the table. It is implied that it is more than one placing of a book, and well, if it's more than one placing of a book, it's going to be more. It's going to be several books. We don't have to mark the plural explicitly, because if the context suggests plurality more, you don't have to have an overt plural suffix. Yeah. If this is in the lying position, if you are putting something in a sitting position, this could be if you're putting a book on the shelf like this, then you could use probably shindash to set it on it. If it's a really tall book, maybe you could even say shogaltash and putting it in the standing position. I don't know. But this is putting something in, let's say, a sitting position. So if it was like a vase or something like that, then you would use shindash, which originally is actually derived from shinchash, to sit, using this D as a transitivizer that we saw in the slides this week. Yeah, and finally, so this is the sitting position. Finally, we have got putting something up on the wall, and then it's hanging on the wall, putting something into a hanging position. Yeah, so just make sure that you have an overview of these, because if you get these things wrong, it can be amusing for Mari native speakers. The choice of it, sometimes they distinguish it in situations where, even if you can theoretically distinguish between them in your language, like standing something somewhere, setting something somewhere, putting it down somewhere, so you don't really. Like a thing that has surprised me is that I've heard Mari native speakers have told me that if you put a book in your backpack, you will use a different verb depending on if you're putting it in upright like this, or if you're putting it in down lying like this. Shindash, pishdash. Okay, but that gets us to the text. And in this text, we now get to follow Sergei as he goes about his job, and he is interviewing the head of an enterprise about how the enterprise meets the economic challenges of its time. And the topic of this text makes it somewhat hard to read, because what do I know about economic policies of Russia and the different economic systems that are in place and the such. But it's just making a whole lot of usage of the syntax that we have looked at, the usage of participles as verbal nouns and whatnot. So it's all stuff that we have done, but it's just a lot of it. But you can watch the long form video. You can see my students working their way through it and realizing in the end that, hey, we actually could do this. Yeah, and that gets you to the exercises. And once you're done with the exercises, you can also have a look at the song of the week, Kengesh Yur, Summer Rain. Yeah, as we were as the class was getting to this point, summer was actually approaching, and we weren't yet quite in the drought that we are in here in Vienna right now. Okay, but in any case, I'm going to see you next time.